finally, Dr. Donna Hicks, who is an associate at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs here at Harvard University, and previously was the deputy director of the program of International Conflict Analysis and Resolution at the Weatherhead Center at Harvard. Donna has been involved in numerous unofficial diplomatic conflict resolution efforts, including projects in the Middle East, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, Colombia, Cuba, and Northern Ireland. She was a consultant to the BBC, where she co-facilitated a television series, Facing the Truth, with Archbishop Desmond Tutu, which aired in the UK and on BBC World. She has taught conflict resolution at Harvard, Clark, and Columbia universities, and conducts training seminars in the Dignity Model, a human-centered approach to rebuilding conflict relationships in the US and abroad. Donna, in 2000, authored a book, Dignity, Its Essential Role in Resolving Conflict. And in 2018, she published a new book, a sort of a sequel to that book, called Leading with Dignity, How to Create a Culture That Brings Out the Best in People, also published by Yale University Press, and is a recent recipient of a prestigious Association of American Publishers award. Yes. And Donna, I also think, has been at all of our colloquia. So it's, I guess, fitting that we're ending this first part with Donna's comments. So
thank you, Danilo. Thank you. And thank you, my fellow panelists. That was really thought-provoking remarks. We could just stop here, and I think all of us would be full. But thank you. I'm gonna actually say a few things, but mostly about Mike. And the impact that Mike Hoffman had on my work, and the relationship that I established with the center, with Mary and Gail and Robert and others. And it was here, the very first time I met Mike Hoffman was here at our first colloquium. And I remember him sitting, like right where you're sitting, and whenever anyone was talking, he had this penetrating listening style. You could tell he was taking everything in and grappling with it. And after my presentation, and when the colloquium was finished and we had the Q&A, he came up to me and he said, you know, I really appreciate what you're doing, and there's such alignment between our work at the center in ethics, in business, and the work that you're doing, and I'd love to talk to you more about the correspondences between our approaches. And I said, sure, great. And he invited me to go to Bentley, and we went to the cafeteria there and sat for about a 2-hour lunch. It must have been at least that, at least it felt that way to me. And he was telling me about his remarkable history, where he was really the father of business ethics in many ways, started the whole movement, and sharing all of his, of course he was very humble about it. He never, he wasn't really blowing his horn, but only to give me a sense of what his background was and how our work purposes really were in alignment. And so we were going on and on at that time. And I remember the closing thing that he said to me after I explained all my dignity work and the things that I had been doing in the workplace, trying to understand how to address some of the dysfunctional aspects of the work environments. And then he said to me at the end, he said, you know, Donna, there are no ethics without dignity. And so that launched a 7-year friendship and collaboration back and forth. And it was after another colloquium where Sandra Waddick, who's sitting right back there, she and I were on a panel. We shared a panel together, and I don't remember who else was on it. But Sandra was giving a talk about her work on wisdom and her work on intellectual shamans, and I could see Mike just riveted by what she was saying. And then I gave my presentation about dignity and how important it was for all of us to understand the crucial role it plays in our lives, and how we all want to be treated as if we mattered. And I think, Sandra, you and I were quite passionate about in our presentations. And so after that, Sandra and I get a phone call from, maybe it was Mary, saying, Donna, Mike wants to have a conversation with you and Sandra. It was, oh, okay, great, right? Remember this conversation we had, a conference call? And so he said, you know, we have this Verizon lecture series, and we really want you and Sandra to share the, the presentation on ethical leadership in the 21st century. So, I mean, I know we were just thrilled, weren't we? We were delighted, and he was suggesting ways that our work on wisdom and dignity could be woven together, and we were just thrilled. And not to mention the fact that it helped our friendship. Sandra and I became good friends, and we've, been friends ever since. But I want to, and the other thing that lecture did, it was great. It was at Bentley. We had a wonderful turnout. It was just, for me, it was one of the highlights of doing this work in the workplace, meeting up with all of the fellows and the Verizon people and certainly Sandra and everything else that led to. But we ended up writing a paper, and that paper was entitled Dignity, Wisdom, and Tomorrow's Ethical Business Leaders. And that's the topic that he wanted us to address. And I just want to read you Michael's introduction. There's just a very short introduction, what he wrote, but I think it's profound, and I think it speaks volumes to who he was and how he imagined the impact of trying to develop ethical leaders who understood dignity and wisdom. So he was talking about the lecture that we gave, and he said, the lecture came at an auspicious moment at the Center for Business Ethics. It was at the time when it was announcing that in 2006, it will celebrate the 40th anniversary. And as we reflect back on 4 decades of advancing business ethics, say that fast, the time is also fitting that through this lecture, we get back to our roots and recall what business ethics is at its essence. It was not long ago that the word ethics was seen as unrelated to the word business, and that disconnect, the door was open wide to all sorts of corruption in that disconnect. Two other words that also are not often associated with business, but should be, are wisdom and dignity. When we fail to see the vital role of wisdom and dignity in the conduct of business, the result is an impoverished understanding of business. If 40 years of relentless study of business ethics has shown us anything, it is that when one narrows one's view of business as simple pursuit of profits, corruption and danger follow as surely as night follows day. By contrast, when business is infused with the ideas of honoring humanity, such as wisdom and dignity, the capacity of business to contribute to social flourishing is colossal and a testimony to human genius. Doctors Hicks and Waddick have done us a service by reminding us that in pursuit of business ethics, we are affirming something deep and noble that can and should be a part of doing business. As we at the Center celebrate our 4 decades of work, it is refreshing and humbling to return to the core values of wisdom and dignity that are foundational to the ethical conduct of business. I mean, he basically summed it up here. I don't even know why we didn't even have to write anything, Sandra, but I mean, just that, and this was what he had. Michael had this vision and ability to articulate where the gaps were. And how the connections could be made. And he did it so humbly, and he did it so generously. And I also want to make a connection between the word dignity and generosity. I had a fellow who was working with me, a Fulbright scholar who was working with me from Morocco, who spoke Arabic. She was from Morocco, and she told me that in Arabic, the word dignity means generosity. Just kind of woke up a part of my brain that I hadn't really thought of before. And I thought about Mike in that context. I thought about how he lived his life with dignity. There wasn't a moment that I understood him, that I knew him in our interactions, where he didn't really look at everybody he dealt with as someone of value and worth and treated us that way. So that's where that generosity, I guess that's one of the virtues you probably look at too, right? Generosity. So what is it about the understanding of dignity that contributes to ethical leadership? These are the things that we talked about, Mike and I, And I think the very basic idea that I want to impart is that we are all born with dignity. Every faith community, every religious tradition has some aspect of dignity, that we were born with it. It's, in Catholicism and Christianity, of course, we're born in the image and likeness of God. But it's not just limited to Christianity. All the faith communities have some mention of dignity and having to honor the value and worth of each human being. And so, but here's the catch. Even though we're all born with dignity, we're not born knowing how to act like it. And this is where the role of education comes in, that Mike understood so profoundly. This is the role of education. And I loved what you just said about reading about these virtues and wanting to say, okay, I've read this book about all these virtues, therefore I am the... No, you have to practice, practice, practice. And it's the thing of, oh, you're kidding me. Already 2 minutes? Holy smokes. Okay, so that's fine. And when I go into a workplace and do a consultation about dignity, it is shocking to me, absolutely shocking, how ignorant most people are of the concept. And they say, dignity, well, we really haven't thought about that. Well, what, everybody's born with dignity? Sure, yeah, that's great. Okay, right. And so my big takeaway is that this ignorance gap is really one of the contributors to why people make those kind of unethical decisions that you pointed out, Dawn Marie. And one of the big problems, I think, is that knowing that human beings don't like to look bad in the eyes of others. And we will do whatever it takes to not look bad, to cover up our mistakes, to deceive ourselves, to, lie, and you were mentioning blaming and shaming others, to deflect your guilt. This is a fundamental aspect of what it means to be human, and it works against our acting as if we had dignity. And so, but understanding these basic ideas about where dignity comes from and what the dignity obstacles are to our living a life of dignity, knowing when we have to say, hey, wait a minute, especially as ethical leaders, we made a mistake here. We made a mistake either in our policy, we made a mistake in our judgment, we made a mistake in the way we've treated certain groups in our organization, whatever it is, that's what it takes to actually create an environment where people feel safe, people feel they can be their authentic selves. So with good ethical leadership and the link to dignity, and I'll close with this idea, is that I read somewhere, and Manolo and I were trying to decide where this was. I think it might have been Kant, but I think also Michael Rosen, who wrote a book about dignity, mentioned this, and that is, how do you know you've got dignity? How do you feel it? Not intellectually here, but how do you know you have dignity? And we know, and this person, whether it was Kant or Michael Rosen himself, he said, we know we have dignity when we choose to do what's right. Because that's often a very difficult choice, especially your examples, Donna Marie. So that's, if you want to feel your dignity, do what's right. Do the right thing. Thank you.